The phone call came through at 11:43 on a Thursday night when the Iron Horse bar had emptied down to regulars nursing final beers before Mickey behind the counter started his closing routine. December cold seeped through the walls despite the heater running overtime, and outside Pine Ridge, Oregon wore the kind of darkness that made midnight feel inevitable, even hours before it arrived. The answering machine clicked on because Mickey's hands were full with glasses, and through the tinny speaker, a voice emerged that didn't belong to anyone calling a biker bar past business hours. Small, young, female. "Hello, is this where Santa's helpers are? I saw the Christmas lights on your building and when Mommy drove past, and I thought maybe you could help because Santa didn't come last year and Mommy said he might not come this year either, and I really want just one present. Just one. My name is Lily and I'm 5 and I've been very good. Please. If you're Santa's helpers, please remember me." The line went dead. The machine beeped. Mickey stopped wiping the counter and stared at the device like it had spoken in tongues. Nobody moved. The regulars, 3 men in leather vests who'd heard worse things in their lives than a child's desperate plea, sat frozen with their drinks halfway to their mouths. Then Mickey hit replay, and they listened again to 5-year-old hope breaking itself against the reality that Santa's helpers worked out of a bar decorated with motorcycle parts and beer signs. Jake Harrison heard it from his apartment above the garage next door, where sound carried through old walls and thin insulation. He'd been trying to sleep the kind of trying that involves staring at ceiling stains and cataloging regrets until exhaustion won. The child's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade finding ribs sharp and unexpected and impossible to ignore. He was downstairs before he'd consciously decided to move his boots, hitting the bar floor just as Mickey started the message a third time. Jake's jaw was tight enough to make his teeth ache. His hands had curled into fists without his permission. 42 years old, and he still couldn't hear a kid asking for help without his whole body going rigid with old trauma dressed up as anger. "Play it again." Mickey complied. The voice filled the room, and Jake closed his eyes because it hurt less that way. He could hear everything the child wasn't saying, the carefully practiced politeness, the fear underneath, the hope, the way she'd probably rehearsed this call a dozen times before building enough courage to actually dial. He recognized all of it. He'd been that kid once, different decade, but same desperation, same belief that if he just asked nicely enough, somebody might care. "When this come in?" Mickey checked the machine. 40 minutes ago. Caller ID shows a local number. "Get me the address." "Stone, it's almost midnight. Whatever this is." Jake's eyes opened and found Mickey's, and whatever the bartender saw there made him reach for the phone book without finishing his sentence. Some things didn't need explaining. Some instincts ran too deep to question. The address belonged to an apartment building on Maple Street, the kind of place where plaster-cracked heat came sporadically and landlords only showed up when rent was late. Jake knew it by reputation. Half the town did. It was where people ended up when better options had evaporated, where families clustered in units too small for the number of bodies sleeping there, where Christmas lights were luxuries nobody could justify. He pulled on his jacket and walked out into cold that felt personal, like Oregon winter had singled him out for punishment. His breath fogged the air. His motorcycle sat where he'd left it, chrome catching streetlight, engine cold. He started it anyway because walking would take too long, and the child's voice was still echoing in his skull. The ride across town gave him time to think, which was dangerous. Thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to the foster homes, all 5 of them, 14 years of bouncing between families who wanted the state checks, but not the damaged kid who came with them. He'd learned early that hope was a trap, that asking for things only confirmed you were powerless, that Christmas was when the gap between what other children got and what you got became impossible to ignore. Christmas 1995, age 14. He'd spent the morning watching his foster family's biological children open presents while he sat on the couch with the wrapped box of socks someone had bought out of obligation. Christmas 1998, age 17. He'd been alone in a group home where the staff worked skeleton shifts on holidays and dinner came from donated cans of soup. Christmas 2003, age 22. He'd just earned his Hell's Angels patch and celebrated by getting blackout drunk to avoid thinking about how nobody in his life knew or cared that he'd been born. The pattern had continued for 2 decades. Christmas meant isolation, meant remembering that he'd never been chosen, never been wanted, never been the kid somebody fought to keep. And now here he was at 42, owner of a successful garage, respected member of his chapter, still carrying wounds that hadn't healed because some injuries didn't close, no matter how much time passed. The apartment building emerged from darkness, looking worse than its reputation suggested. The exterior paint had surrendered to weather years ago. Broken windows wore cardboard bandages. A rusted swing set sat in a courtyard where no children played this late, its chains creaking in wind that smelled like approaching snow. Jake killed his engine and sat studying the structure, counting floors, noting which units showed light behind curtains. Third floor, number 47, according to the phone book. Lights were off. Either everyone was asleep or nobody was home. He checked his watch, 12:23 a.m. Too late to knock, too late to do anything except confirm the address and come back tomorrow. But he sat there anyway, engine ticking as it cooled because leaving felt wrong. The child had called asking for help, and here he was, and doing nothing felt like every adult who'd ever looked at young Jake Harrison and decided he was someone else's problem. Movement caught his attention. A woman exiting the building, moving fast, her coat clutched, closed against the cold. She carried a bag that looked like it held work clothes and walked with the hunched posture of someone trying to make herself smaller, less visible, less likely to draw attention from whatever dangers lived in parking lots after midnight. She climbed into a car that should have been retired years ago, an old sedan with primer spots and a passenger door that didn't match the body color. The engine coughed 3 times before catching. Jake memorized the license plate out of habit. The car pulled away, trailing blue smoke, and he started his bike to follow. She drove to Murphy's Diner on Route 7, the 24-hour place that catered to truckers and insomniacs and people working overnight shifts because day jobs didn't pay enough. Jake parked across the street and watched her enter through the employee door, watched her tie an apron over her clothes, watched her take up position behind the counter, where exhaustion lived in her shoulders and defeat colored the way she moved. 28, maybe 30. Dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that needed retying. Features that would have been pretty if stress hadn't worn them down to something sharp and defensive. She moved through her opening routine with mechanical efficiency, starting coffee, checking supplies, wiping counters that weren't dirty, because movement was better than standing still with your thoughts. This was the mother. Had to be. The voice on the phone had said, "Mommy," and here was a woman working graveyard shift at a diner the day after telling her 5-year-old that Santa might not come. Jake's hands tightened on the handlebars. The math was simple and brutal. Single mother overnight, work apartment in the bad part of town, child old enough to know Christmas meant presents, but young enough to still believe in Santa. He'd seen this story before. He'd lived a version of it. The details changed, but the structure stayed the same: poverty, desperation, systems that didn't care, and kids who paid the price. The diner filled slowly with truckers, stopping for coffee and eggs. The woman served them with practiced efficiency, her smile never reaching her eyes, her movements economical in the way of people who've learned not to waste energy. Jake watched until his coffee shop across the street opened at 5 a.m., then he walked over and bought the darkest roast they had and waited for the sun to come up. Morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of December day that promised snow without delivering. Jake returned to Maple Street at 7 when the apartment building showed signs of life, lights clicking on doors opening, residents emerging to face another day. He parked down the block and waited. At 7:45, the woman's car returned. She parked in the same spot and climbed out, moving slower than she had the night before, fatigue obvious in every step. She let herself into the building, and Jake gave her 10 minutes before following. The interior hallway smelled like old cooking and mildew. Stairs creaked under his boots. Third floor was worse than the others, the carpet worn through to backing in places, water stains on the ceiling, suggesting roof leaks nobody had bothered fixing. Number 47 sat at the end of the hall, its door slightly warped in the frame, a doormat that said "Welcome," with letters faded to ghosts. He stood there listening. Voices inside the woman and someone smaller. The child. Their conversation filtered through cheap wood and thinner walls. "Mommy, I'm hungry." "I know, baby. Let me make you something. Can we have pancakes?" "We don't have mix right now. How about cereal?" "We're out of cereal." "Then toast. I can make toast." Silence, then the child's voice again, smaller now. "Did Santa's helpers call back?" Jake's breath stopped. The woman's response took too long, and when it came, it carried weight. Not yet, sweetheart, but maybe they will. I asked really nicely. I said please and everything. I know you did. You were very polite. Maybe I should call again. Maybe they didn't hear me. Lily, baby, I don't think. The conversation continued, but Jake had stopped listening. He walked back down the stairs and out into morning light that felt too bright, too normal for what he'd just heard. The child had called. The mother knew about it, and the mother was lying about hope because what else could she do when reality offered nothing better? He rode back to the garage and spent the next hour pretending to work on an engine rebuild while actually thinking about foster care Christmases and phone calls that went unanswered and 5-year-old girls who believed in Santa's helpers because believing was easier than accepting that nobody was coming. At 9:30, he made a decision. He called Tommy Martinez, the chapter's head mechanic, and the closest thing Jake had to a best friend, despite never using that term because bikers didn't do feelings like that. You busy? Tommy's voice came through, rough with sleep. The fine busy. Need you to check something. Woman named, he realized he didn't know her name. He described the car, instead gave Tommy the license plate. Tommy grumbled but agreed because that's what brothers did. They showed up when asked, even when they asked didn't make immediate sense. Jake hung up and stared at his phone. The next call was harder. He pulled up Chief Marcus Williams's number and hesitated because what he was about to do would set things in motion that couldn't be stopped. Marcus had been president of the Pine Ridge Hells Angels chapter for 12 years. He was 53, built like a brick wall, and possessed the kind of leadership that came from respecting everyone equally until they gave him reason not to. He also had rules about when to involve the chapter in personal business, and Jake wasn't sure this qualified. He dialed anyway. Chief, got something I need to run by you. I'm listening. Jake explained about the phone call, the child's voice, the apartment building, the mother working overnight shifts. Marcus listened without interrupting, which meant he was taking it seriously, which meant Jake had made the right call. You verify any of this? Address checks out. Saw the mother leaving for work at midnight, coming home at dawn. Heard them talking inside the apartment. Kid mentioned calling Santa's helpers. Mother's lying about someone calling back. You knocked, not yet. Wanted to talk to you first. Marcus was quiet long enough that Jake wondered if the line had dropped. Then, what's your gut saying? His gut was saying this was foster care all over again. Christmas trauma repackaged, a child asking for help, while adults pretended not to hear. His gut was saying he had to do something because doing nothing would confirm he was exactly like everyone who'd failed young Jake Harrison. My gut says that kid needs help, and we're the only ones who heard her ask for it. We don't know what we're walking into. Could be a custody situation, could be drugs, could be 100 things that aren't our business. Could be a family that's barely surviving and one kid who still believes somebody might care enough to show up. Another pause, then Marcus exhaled hard enough for the phone to catch it. You want to bring this to church. Church meant official chapter meeting, meant putting it to a vote, meant making it the club's business instead of just Jake's obsession. It also meant resources, meant backup, meant if things went sideways, there'd be brothers to help handle it. Yeah, I do. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., bring everything you've got. Tommy called back at noon with information that made Jake's jaw tight. The car was registered to Sarah Morgan, age 28. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants. Address matched the apartment. Child's name was Lily Morgan, kindergarten at Pine Ridge Elementary. Father's name was David Morgan. Last known address in Seattle, Washington. Divorced from Sarah in 2021. No child support payments on record for the past 18 months. The picture clarified itself. Young mother deadbeat, father, no support system, working minimum wage to keep a roof over her daughter's head. Jake had seen this movie. He knew how it ended if nobody intervened. He spent Friday watching. Not stalking, he told himself, though the line was thin. He needed information before tomorrow's meeting, needed to understand the scope of what he was asking the chapter to take on. So he watched Sarah Morgan leave for her shift at Murphy's Diner at 5 p.m. Watched the apartment stay dark for 2 hours before lights came on, and he realized someone else was watching the child while Sarah worked. A neighbor, maybe. Or Lily was alone, which made Jake's hands curl into fists again. He waited until 7 p.m., then approached the building, climbed the stairs, and knocked on number 47. Silence. Then small footsteps and a child's voice through the door. Who is it? Hi there, my name's Jake. Is your mom home? She's at work. Are you alone? Mrs. Chen is supposed to check on me, but she's sleeping. His chest tightened. 5 years old and alone in an apartment while mom worked overnight shifts and the neighbor who was supposed to supervise had fallen asleep. This was exactly the kind of situation that ended badly, the kind Child Protective Services would use as ammunition if anyone reported it, the kind that resulted in kids getting removed and mothers losing custody and everything getting worse instead of better. Okay, well, I'm going to leave now. You lock this door and don't open it for anyone except your mom. Understand? Okay. He heard the deadbolt slide home, heard the chain rattle into place, heard small feet padding away from the door. Then he walked back to his bike and sat in the parking lot until midnight when Sarah's car returned and she let herself into the building, moving with the exhaustion of someone who just worked a 7-hour shift and had to do it again tomorrow. The chapter meeting convened at 6 a.m. Saturday in the back room of the Iron Horse Bar. 12 men assembled, Marcus in the president's chair, Jake standing because sitting felt impossible, and 10 other brothers whose faces he'd known for years. Tommy Martinez, Bobby Rev Washington, Danny Spark Chen, and 7 others whose road names were better known than their legal identities. Jake told the story. He played the answering machine message that Mickey had saved. He laid out everything he'd learned about Sarah Morgan and her daughter Lily, about the late-night diner shifts and the alone child in the apartment in the building where Hope went to die. She called, asking for Santa's helpers, kids 5 years old. Mother's working herself into the ground and it's still not enough. Christmas is next week and that little girl thinks someone's going to show up because she asked nicely. Bobby leaned back in his chair. We're not a charity, Stone. We help our own. She asked for help. She called a bar at random, probably saw our lights and thought we looked festive. That doesn't make it our problem. Jake's voice went cold. Then whose problem is it? The fathers, he skipped town 18 months ago. The governments, they don't advise him about families like this. The churches, when's the last time you saw a church feeding hungry kids? Easy, brother. Marcus's voice cut through before the argument could escalate. He stood, moved to the front of the room and crossed his arms. Here's what I'm hearing. We've got a single mother working poor, doing everything right and still failing because the system's rigged against people like her. We've got a 5-year-old kid who's scared enough to call strangers begging for help. And we've got Stone here telling us we should care. He looked around the room. Anybody got a problem with that last part? Silence, then Rev spoke again, his voice softer. What are you proposing? We buy the kids some presents, drop them off and disappear. I'm proposing we find out what they actually need and figure out if we can help. Tommy raised his hand. I can get into county records check for eviction notices, utility shutoffs, that kind of thing. If the situation's as bad as Stone thinks, there'll be documentation. Marcus nodded. Do it. Meantime, I want eyes on the landlord, the building management, the diner where she works. We need the full picture before we commit to anything. And if the picture's bad, then we vote on whether to get involved. But we do this right. No half measures. If we're helping, we're actually helping, not just throwing money at the problem and walking away. The meeting broke up with assignments given and timelines set. Jake walked out into morning cold, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Not the comfortable routine of running the garage or the predictable rhythm of club activities, but the sharp-edged purpose that came from seeing someone who needed saving and having the power to maybe possibly actually do something about it. Tommy's report came back Sunday morning. Sarah Morgan was 3 months behind on rent, owed $2,100, and had received an eviction notice dated December 1st with a move-out date of January 5th. Utilities were current but barely paid late every month, with amounts that suggested she was choosing between electricity and food. No credit cards, no car payment beyond what she owed someone who'd sold her the sedan that barely ran, no safety net visible anywhere in her financial records. She was drowning, the kind of drowning that happened slowly enough that nobody noticed until you'd already gone under. Jake took the information to Marcus, who read it without expression, and then looked up with eyes that had seen too much human suffering to be surprised by more. This the kind of situation you grew up in? The question landed hard. Jake had never talked much about foster care, about the group homes, about Christmas mornings, That confirmed nobody wanted him. But Marcus knew anyway because good leaders paid attention to their brother's wounds even when those wounds stayed hidden. Yeah, different details, same ending. Kid grows up knowing they don't matter. Turns into an adult who doesn't trust anyone. Spends their whole life trying to prove they're worth something. And you think helping this family helps that kid you used to be. It wasn't a question. Jake didn't answer because answers weren't necessary when truth was obvious. Marcus stood and clapped Jake's shoulder. Church meeting tomorrow night. Full chapter. We'll vote on it then. Meantime, I want you to understand something. If we do this, if we vote to help this family, it's not charity and it's not pity. It's brotherhood extending to people who need it. We're not saving them. We're including them. Understood. And Stone, don't go back to that apartment until after the vote. No contact, no surveillance. If we're doing this, we're doing it official. Jake agreed, even though staying away felt wrong, but Marcus was right. This couldn't be Jake's crusade. It had to be the chapter's decision, or it would fall apart the moment things got complicated. He spent Sunday and Monday pretending to work while actually thinking about 5-year-old Lily Morgan alone in an apartment calling strangers because mom was working and Santa wasn't coming and hope was a thing you had to manufacture yourself when reality offered nothing. He thought about 14-year-old Jake Harrison watching foster siblings open presents and trying not to feel anything because feelings made it hurt worse. He thought about 22-year-old Jake Harrison earning his patch and finally finding family after spending his childhood believing he was unfindable. Monday evening, the chapter assembled again. Full attendance, this time 23 men cramming into the back room, leather vests and road names and brotherhood earned through years of riding together. Marcus called the meeting to order and laid out the situation with clinical precision. Family in crisis, child in need, Christmas, approaching chapter decision required on whether to intervene. We're not talking about buying presents. We're talking about paying back rent, covering utilities, making sure this family survives past January. That's minimum commitment. Maximum commitment might mean jobs, housing, ongoing support. I need to know who's in. Bobby stood first. I got questions. What's our exit strategy? We solve this crisis, then what? We're on the hook forever. We help them stabilize. After that, they're on their own unless circumstances change. And if the mother refuses help, pride's a real thing. Poor people don't always want charity from bikers. Marcus's expression hardened. Then we make it clear this isn't charity, it's reciprocity. Her daughter asked for help. We're answering. That's what the patch means. We show up when called. Tommy raised his hand. I'm in for whatever you need. Parts from the shop, labor, whatever. Danny nodded. Same. My restaurant can do food if they need it. One by one, the brothers committed. Not unanimously, not immediately, but with the kind of growing consensus that came from men recognizing something that mattered. By the time the last vote was cast, 21 of 23 had agreed. The two holdouts abstained rather than vote no, which was close enough to consensus for Marcus to call it official. Motion passes. We're helping the Morgan family. Stone, this was your call, so your point, man. Figure out how we make first contact without scaring them. Tommy, your support. Bobby, start working on rental assistance paperwork in case we need to make it look official. Rest of you be ready to move when called. The meeting adjourned, but the wait stayed. Jake walked out, knowing this was really happening. Knowing 21 brothers had just agreed to help strangers because a 5-year-old's voice on an answering machine had broken through cynicism and touched something none of them wanted to admit still existed. He went home to his apartment above the garage and lay awake staring at ceiling stains again. But this time the insomnia came from anticipation instead of regret. Tomorrow they'd start. Tomorrow the Morgan family would discover that Santa's helpers actually existed and they wore leather vests and rode motorcycles and they remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. But while Jake lay awake planning intervention, Cheryl Morgan sat at her kitchen table with bills spread in front of her and math that refused to work no matter how many times she recalculated. Rent $2,100 owed plus $700 for January due in 3 weeks. Electricity $93 past due. Car insurance canceled for non-payment. Phone bill 1 warning away from disconnection. Food budget $27 to last until Friday's paycheck. She dropped a plate at the diner Thursday night. Frank Murphy had docked $8 from her pay because that was legal and she couldn't afford to argue. A customer named Patricia Hendricks had left $2 on a $47 check and told Sarah maybe if she smiled more, she'd get better tips. Like poverty was a personality flaw that proper attitude could fix. Saturday night had brought 3 truckers who ran her back and forth for refills, and each left $1 because that was generous by their standards. Never mind that she'd walked 5 miles serving their table alone. Sunday afternoon, a family had occupied her best booth for 2 hours, let their kids make a mess that took 20 minutes to clean, and left 73 cents because the father thought rounding up to $15 was plenty. The math didn't lie. She was $1,300 short, even if she skipped groceries and prayed the car didn't break down and accepted that they'd lose the apartment January 5th. She had 23 days to find a miracle, or pack what little they owned and move somewhere cheaper. Except nowhere was cheaper because cheap housing had waiting lists 6 months long and deposits she couldn't afford and landlords who wouldn't rent to single mothers with evictions on their record. She'd thought about asking her sister in Seattle for help, but Jessica had stopped answering calls 6 months ago after Sarah had asked for grocery money one too many times. She'd thought about church, but Father Thomas's parish ran on donations from people almost as poor as she was, and Christmas already stretched them thin. She'd thought about government assistance, but she made exactly $47, too much monthly to qualify for food stamps, and earned precisely $19, too much to get housing support, because the system was designed to trap people in the gap between poverty and help. The clock on the stove read 1:17 a.m. Lily was asleep in the bedroom they shared, the only bedroom, because the apartment was a one-bedroom that Sarah had lied about on the application by claiming she'd used the living room couch. She'd lied about a lot of things: her employment history, her references, her marital status, anything necessary to get approved, because desperation made liars of honest people. David's text messages sat in her phone, deleted but memorized. He'd sent them sporadically for the first year after leaving. Sorry, can't do this. You'll be fine. Stop calling. Then silence for 18 months except the divorce papers that arrived via mail with a Seattle return address and a new woman's name on his emergency contact list. 3 years married, 1 child, produced vows spoken in a courthouse because neither of them had money for a real wedding. He'd been charming at first, the kind of charming that covered for being chronically unemployed, that made broken promises sound like circumstances instead of character. He'd held Lily twice after she was born, complained about crying, announced he wasn't ready for fatherhood, and disappeared in 2020 with a note that said, "I can't do this, I'm sorry," like his inability was something that deserved sympathy instead of rage. Sarah had been 25, then new mother, no job skills beyond waitressing. Parents dead in a car crash 3 years earlier. Sister checked out emotionally, and a baby who needed everything. She'd survived by working doubles, by accepting that sleep was negotiable, by teaching herself that poverty was simply logistics that had to be managed one day at a time. But 3 years of managing had ground her down to bone. She was tired in ways sleep didn't fix. She was scared in ways that made her hands shake when she wasn't actively holding them still. She was angry at David, at the system, at customers who left shit tips and landlords who raised rent, and employers who docked pay for drop-it plates, and the universe that seemed personally invested in making sure Sarah Morgan's stayed exactly where she was. The bills blurred as tears finally came. She let them fall because Lily was asleep, and crying alone at the kitchen table didn't count as weakness if nobody witnessed it. She cried for the Christmas she couldn't give her daughter, for the presents that wouldn't appear for the 5-year-old who'd called a bar asking for Santa's helpers because Mom had mentioned seeing lights on the building, and Lily's brain had made connections that broke Sarah's heart. She'd found out about the call Friday morning when Lily asked if anyone had responded. Sarah had lied reflexively, said maybe they would, knowing they wouldn't because whoever answered phones at bars didn't care about desperate kids. She'd added it to the pile of small cruelties that defined their life hope offered, and then crushed beliefs, shattered magic revealed as fiction. But lying to Lily hurt worse than the bills or the eviction or the exhaustion. Lying meant Sarah had become the kind of parent who protected children from reality by teaching them to expect nothing, who prepared them for disappointment by delivering it early, who transformed Christmas from wonder into evidence that the world didn't care. The tears stopped eventually because tears always stopped. Crying didn't change math, didn't pay rent, didn't make miracles appear. She wiped her face with her sleeve, stacked the bills in order of urgency, and accepted that January 5th they'd be homeless unless something impossible happened. At 1:47 a.m., Sarah Morgan went to bed, believing nobody was coming, believing the phone call had been childish fantasy, believing they'd survive this the same way they survived everything alone, desperate and hoping tomorrow might somehow hurt less than today, even though experience suggested it wouldn't. She didn't know that across town, Jake Harrison lay awake planning her rescue. She didn't know 21 bikers had voted to help. She didn't know that impossible things sometimes happen when the right person heard the right call at the right moment and decided that doing nothing was worse than whatever risk came with showing up. She only knew that tomorrow she had to work another double shift, had to smile for customers who wouldn't tip, had to come home to a daughter who still believed in Santa's helpers, even though believing would only make the disappointment sharper. And in the morning, both Sarah and Jake would wake to the same sun rising over Pine Ridge, neither knowing that their lives were about to collide in ways that would change everything. Christmas Eve morning arrived with frost coating Pine Ridge in white that glittered under streetlights, still burning at 6 a.m. when Jake pulled into the Iron Horse Bar parking lot. Inside, Tommy and Bobby had already started organizing the operation with military precision that would have been funny if the stakes weren't real. The main room had been transformed into a staging area, tables covered with wrapped presents, boxes of food stacked against the wall, envelopes containing cash counted and recounted to make sure the numbers matched what the chapter had pledged. $2,300, $2,100 for back rent, plus $200 for utilities and a buffer in case Roger Bellamy, the landlord, tried demanding extra fees. Tommy had purchased everything on the list Jake had compiled based on watching the Morgan apartment winter coat and size 5T boots that would actually fit clothes that weren't threadbare toys, appropriate for a 5-year-old girl who still believed in magic. Bobby had handled the food, filling 3 boxes with staples that would last a month if stretched carefully. This feels bigger than I thought it would. Jake looked up from the envelope he'd been staring at for 5 minutes. Tommy stood beside him, holding a wrapped present, his expression caught between satisfaction and uncertainty. We're committing to more than one night. You ready for that? Question is whether she's ready for it. Proud people don't always accept help the way you think they will. Jake had been thinking about that since the vote passed. Sarah Morgan worked doubles to support her daughter, lied to landlords to keep a roof over their heads, dropped plates, and accepted pay docs without complaint, because complaining meant unemployment. That kind of survival required walls, required refusing to need anyone, required believing you could handle everything alone, because depending on others meant getting hurt when they inevitably left. He recognized it because he'd built those same walls himself. 28 years of them from age 8, when his mother vanished, until age 36, when he'd finally let Chief Marcus see past the armor. Walls kept you safe, but they also kept you alone, and Jake had spent too many years alone to think isolation was strength. We do this right. Make it clear we're not judging her, not pitying her, just answering a call. Marcus arrived at 6:30, followed by the rest of the brothers who committed to helping. The plan was simple: load everything into trucks, drive to Maple Street, deliver it quietly enough not to wake the building, but obviously enough that Sarah would find it Christmas morning. Anonymous help, the kind that didn't require explanation or create obligation. Except Jake couldn't shake the feeling that anonymous wouldn't work. Sarah would see the presents and the food and the cash, and she'd panic. She'd think it was a mistake or a scam or something with strings attached, because good things didn't happen to people like her without cost. She'd probably try to return. Everything would spend Christmas Day tracking down whoever had left. It would refuse to accept help because accepting meant admitting she needed it. I want to be there when she finds it. Marcus stopped loading a box of groceries and turned to face him. That's not the plan, Stone. We agreed on anonymous. The plan's wrong. She needs to know where this came from, needs to understand it's real. Otherwise, she'll spend Christmas terrified instead of grateful. Or she calls the cops and reports a motorcycle gang stalking her family. Tommy interrupted before the argument could build momentum. What if we do both, leave everything at her door like planned, but Jake stays nearby? If she panics, he's there to explain. If she accepts it, he disappears, gives her choice instead of forcing confrontation. Marcus considered this, his jaw working, while he calculated risks. Finally, he nodded once. Fine, but you stay out of sight unless she clearly needs intervention. We're not scaring a single mother on Christmas Eve. They loaded the trucks at 7 and drove across town in a convoy that drew stares from early morning joggers and dog walkers. 5 motorcycles, 2 pickup trucks, and enough wrapped presents to fill a living room. They looked exactly like what they were, bikers on a mission, which meant by the time they reached Maple Street, half the neighborhood was watching. Mrs. Patterson from apartment 2C stood on her balcony with coffee and a phone pressed to her ear. Mr. Simmons from the unit below Sarah's had his curtains pulled back, eyes tracking every movement. A woman Jake didn't recognize stepped outside to collect her newspaper and then stayed there openly staring as the brothers began unloading. "We've got an audience." Tommy's observation was unnecessary. Jake could feel the attention, could read the mixture of curiosity and suspicion and judgment on faces that had decided bikers meant trouble before even understanding what was happening. In a town like Pine Ridge, reputation preceded reality. The Hells Angels were known, which meant they were feared, which meant anything they did was filtered through expectation that their motives were criminal. The brothers worked efficiently anyway. They carried boxes up the stairs to the 3rd floor, stacked them outside number 47's door, with care to avoid making noise that might wake Sarah or Lily. The presents got arranged in a way that would be impossible to miss: winter coat and boots, visible on top envelope, containing cash tucked between wrapped gifts, food boxes stacked neatly to the side. By 7:45, everything was in place. The brothers filtered back downstairs and dispersed to their vehicles, engines starting but not leaving. Marcus caught Jake's eye and made a gesture that meant, "Your call now," then pulled away with his group. Tommy lingered longest, his truck idling at the curb. "You want backup?" "I want you gone before she sees anyone and assumes the worst." Tommy nodded and drove off, leaving Jake alone with his motorcycle parked 2 buildings down in a clear view of the Morgan apartment door. He settled in to wait, knowing it could be hours before Sarah emerged, knowing she might not emerge at all if she had the day off from work, knowing that this moment, this intersection of his need to help and her potential refusal, would determine whether the next 3 months unfolded as rescue or disaster. The door opened at 8:17. Not Sarah Lily. The 5-year-old appeared in pajamas printed with faded cartoon characters, her dark blonde hair tangled from sleep, her expression still carrying the soft confusion of having just woken up. She took 1 step into the hallway and stopped so completely that Jake could see her freeze from 50 feet away. Then she screamed. Not fear, not terror, pure joy. The kind of scream that came from discovering something impossible had become real, from believing so hard that magic existed that when it finally appeared, the emotion was too big for a small body to contain. "Mommy, Mommy, come look. Santa's helpers came, they came." Sarah appeared in the doorway seconds later, moving fast, her face showing the panic of a mother who'd heard her child scream and assumed emergency. She wore an oversized t-shirt that probably belonged to her ex-husband and had the wild-eyed look of someone yanked from sleep into crisis mode. Her expression cycled rapidly: confusion at the presence, shock at the quantity, fear as understanding arrived that this wasn't normal, this wasn't safe, this was wrong. "Lily, get inside." "But Mommy, look at all." "Inside, now." The command in Sarah's voice made Lily obey immediately, despite not understanding why joy had turned to fear. Sarah pulled her daughter back through the doorway, and Jake watched her scan the hallway, looking for whoever had done this, looking for the threat that must accompany this kind of impossible generosity, because nothing was free and strangers didn't leave thousands of dollars worth of help without expecting something in return. Jake stood from where he'd been leaning against his motorcycle. He didn't approach, didn't call out, just made himself visible so Sarah's searching would find an answer. She spotted him immediately and her whole body went rigid. He could see her making calculations, biker alone watching her building, responsible for whatever was piled outside her door. He needed to move carefully, needed to close the distance between them without triggering the fear that was already obvious in her posture. But before he could take a step, Lily darted around her mother's legs and ran toward the presents, too excited to obey, too young to understand that sometimes gifts came with prices nobody wanted to pay. "Lily Morgan, you stop right." Lily had already reached the presents and was holding up the winter coat, her face transformed by wonder. It was pink with white trim, exactly the kind of coat a 5-year-old would pick for herself if money wasn't a factor. She hugged it to her chest and then looked down the hallway, her eyes finding Jake with the unerring instinct children had for identifying the source of miracles. Are you Santa's helper? The question hit Jake the same way the answering machine message had unexpected and devastating and impossible to ignore. He'd prepared for Sarah's reaction, had mentally rehearsed explanations and justifications and reassurances. He hadn't prepared for Lily to look at him with eyes that held every Christmas wish she'd ever made and ask if he was the reason those wishes were coming true. Yeah, I guess I am. His voice came out rougher than he intended, emotion making it hard to control tone. Lily's smile widened impossibly, and she ran toward him before Sarah could stop her, before Jake could step back, before either adult could prevent what was about to happen. Small arms wrapped around his leg. Fierce grip, desperate gratitude, the weight of a child who'd been waiting her whole life for someone to show up. Jake looked down at dark blonde hair and thin shoulders and felt every defense he'd ever built crack straight down the middle. Thank you so much. I knew you'd come. I told Mama you would. Sarah was already moving, closing the distance between them, her face showing the specific terror mothers felt when strangers touched their children. She grabbed Lily's shoulder and pulled her back, placing her own body between daughter and biker, her voice coming out sharp with fear, masquerading as anger. Who are you? What is this? My name's Jake Harrison. Your daughter called my bar last week asking for help. We're just answering that call. Sarah's eyes narrowed. She was processing, trying to make pieces fit, trying to understand how a phone call from a 5-year-old had resulted in a biker showing up at her door with enough presence to fill a room. This is insane. You can't just— Lily, did you call someone? Did you call a bar? Lily's face crumpled, happiness evaporating as she realized she might be in trouble. I just wanted to ask for help. I saw the Christmas lights when we drove past, and I thought maybe they were Santa's helpers. And you were so sad. Mommy and I wanted to make you happy. So I called the number on the building and you gave strangers our address. I didn't mean to be bad. Jake held up his hands trying to diffuse the situation before Lily started crying, and Sarah's fear turned into something harder to walk back. She didn't give us anything. We looked up the phone number, found your address ourselves. She was just a kid asking for help. We decided to answer. How many of you are there? 23 in the local chapter. 21 voted to help your family. Sarah's face went white. She looked at the presents still piled outside her door, at the boxes of food, at the envelope she probably hadn't noticed yet. Then she looked at Jake, and her expression showed the exact moment when fear overwhelmed everything else. Oh my God, this is Hell's Angels, isn't it? Those patches on your jacket, I've seen them before. You're a gang. We're a motorcycle club. Same thing. Everyone knows what you people do. Drugs, violence, criminal activity. We run charity rides, support veteran causes, and help families in need. That's what we're doing here. Sarah's laugh came out bitter and sharp. Nobody helps families in need. Not like this. There's always a catch, always something you want. Jake recognized the wall going up, recognized the defensive anger that came from years of being let down. He kept his voice level, kept his body language non-threatening, kept trying, even though he could see this was going exactly how Tommy had predicted. There's no catch. Your daughter asked for help. We have resources. We're using them to make sure she has a Christmas and you don't get evicted. That's it, nothing more. You know about the eviction? Her voice had gone very quiet now, the kind of quiet that came before either breaking down or shutting down completely. Jake nodded. We know you're 3 months behind on rent, that your eviction notice says January 5th, that you work doubles at Murphy's Diner, barely making enough to survive. We know because we did our homework before committing to help. You investigated me. We verified the situation, yes. Sarah's hands were shaking now. She gripped Lily tighter, her daughter sensing the shift and staying quiet in that way kids did when adult emotions got too big. This is insane. You can't just investigate people and show up at their door with presents and expect— I don't even know what you expect. What do you expect? Nothing. We expect nothing. Everyone expects something. That's how the world works. Jake took a breath, trying to find words that would penetrate the fear and the walls and the years of being taught that kindness was a lie. I grew up in foster care, 5 different homes between age 8 and 22. Every Christmas, I'd watch other kids open presents while I got token gifts from people who took state checks but didn't actually want me. I know what it's like to be the kid nobody fights for, who calls for help and nobody answers. Sarah's expression shifted slightly. Not softening, but calculating differently now. So this is about you, about making yourself feel better by playing hero. The accusation landed because it wasn't entirely wrong. Jake had admitted to himself days ago that helping Lily meant something to the kid he'd been. But reducing it to ego missed the larger truth. This is about making sure one little girl doesn't grow up thinking she's invisible. If that makes me feel better too, I'm okay with that. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her face still carried suspicion that went bone deep. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I can't accept this. I can't take money from a motorcycle gang and not wonder what happens when you decide you want something in return. I can't let my daughter think strangers are safe just because they show up with gifts. I can't. Her voice broke. Lily made a small sound and wrapped her arms around her mother's waist, offering comfort she was too young to fully understand. Sarah closed her eyes and Jake watched her fight for control, watched her try to hold together in front of her child and a stranger while everything inside her was clearly fracturing. Thank you for trying to help, but we'll manage on our own. She turned to go back inside. Jake's next words stopped her. January 5th is 12 days away. Where are you going to go? Sarah's shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn around. We'll figure something out. We always do. The shelter has a waiting list. Your car won't survive living in it through winter. Your sister in Seattle stopped taking your calls months ago. I'm not trying to be cruel, I'm stating facts. You're out of options and too proud to admit it. Now she turned and the expression on her face was pure rage. Don't you dare. Don't you dare stand there in your leather jacket with your motorcycle gang and lecture me about pride. I've been surviving on my own since I was 18. I raised my daughter alone after her father walked out. I've worked every shit job in this town and kept us fed and clothed and housed without anyone's help. So yes, I have pride because pride is the only thing I've got left that hasn't been taken from me. The speech left her breathing hard, eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. Lily had started crying now, overwhelmed by her mother's emotion, not understanding what was happening, but knowing it was bad. Jake felt the weight of his mistake, felt the way his attempt at help had turned into attack, felt the gap between intention and impact that he should have anticipated better. You're right, I'm sorry. That was out of line. Sarah blinked clearly, not expecting apology. I'm trying to help and doing it badly. Let me try again. He crouched down to Lily's level, making himself smaller, less threatening. Hi, Lily, I'm Jake. You called my bar asking for Santa to help your mom. That took a lot of courage. Thank you for trusting us. Lily wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Are you mad at me? No, sweetheart. Nobody's mad at you. Your mom's just scared because she doesn't know us yet. That's smart. You should be careful about strangers. He looked up at Sarah. How about this? Keep the coat and boots for Lily. Keep the food. Those are practical things you need, and accepting them doesn't obligate you to anything. The rest, the toys, the cash, leave it here. If you change your mind after thinking about it, it'll be waiting. If you don't, we'll pick it up tomorrow and donate it to someone else who needs it. Sarah stared at him like she was trying to identify a trap. Why would you do that? Why give us a choice? Because forcing help on people who don't want it isn't helping. It's controlling. You're Lily's mother. You make the decisions for your family. I'm just offering options. Sarah looked at the presents at her daughter's face, still showing traces of joy beneath the tears, at Jake, kneeling in the hallway, making himself vulnerable in ways she probably didn't recognize, but could feel anyway. Her internal struggle played across her features, need versus pride, survival versus independence. The desire to give Lily Christmas versus the terror of owing something to dangerous strangers. The coat and boots, the food, nothing else. Fair enough. Jake stood and stepped back, giving them space. Sarah gathered Lily into her arms and carried her back into the apartment, closing the door firmly. The deadbolt slid home. The chain rattled into place, and Jake was left standing in the hallway surrounded by presents that had been refused, staring at a closed door, wondering if he'd just made everything worse. He pulled out his phone and called Marcus. She said no. I'm listening. Jake explained the confrontation, Sarah's fear of the compromise they'd reached. Marcus was quiet through the whole thing, only speaking when Jake finished. You let her keep the practical stuff. Yeah, everything else is still here. Good call. Pushing harder would have destroyed any chance of trust. Give her space. Let her process. If she changes her mind, she'll come looking. And if she doesn't, then we respect that decision. We made the offer. We answered the call. If she's not ready to accept help, that's her right. Jake hung up and started carrying the refused presents back down to his truck. Other residents watched from doorways and windows, their expressions showing they had heard at least some of the confrontation. One woman, Mrs. Patterson from 2C, approached as he loaded the last box. That was a nice thing you tried to do. Jake didn't respond, didn't trust himself to be polite to well-meaning strangers right now. She's a proud girl, Sarah is. Been that way since she moved in 2 years ago. Never asks for anything, never admits when she's struggling. It's admirable in a way, but also sad. Yeah, it's real sad. Mrs. Patterson didn't miss the edge in his voice. Don't take it personally. Some people have been hurt so many times that kindness looks like a threat. Give her time. She'll come around. Jake finished loading his truck and rode back to the Iron Horse Bar feeling like he'd failed at something important. The brothers were waiting, could read the outcome on his face before he said anything. She refused. Kept the coat and food, rejected everything else. Tommy exhaled slowly. Called it. Pride's a hell of a thing. So what now? Bobby leaned against the wall, arms crossed. We just let them get evicted. We give her space. Let her make her own choices. Maybe she comes back for help. Maybe she doesn't. And the rent money eviction's still happening in 12 days. Yeah, Jake had thought about that during the ride back. We pay it anyway. Anonymously, this time actually anonymous. Contact the landlord, settle her debt without her knowledge. She keeps her apartment, doesn't have to know we're involved. Marcus nodded slowly. That could work. Removes the immediate crisis without forcing confrontation. But Stone, you need to understand something. If we do this, if we help without her consent, it's crossing a line. She might not appreciate it when she finds out. She'll have a home. I can live with her being angry if it means Lily has somewhere to sleep. The decision was made. Tommy volunteered to handle the landlord contact to make it look like a church charity or community fund, something that wouldn't immediately point back to the club. The others dispersed to spend Christmas Eve with their own families, leaving Jake alone in the bar with refused presents and the certain knowledge that he'd screwed up the simplest part of helping getting someone to accept help. He spent Christmas morning alone in his apartment, which was typical, but felt worse this year because he'd glimpsed something different. He'd seen Lily's face when she realized her call had been answered, had felt her arms around his leg, had heard the joy in her voice. For one perfect moment, he'd given a kid the Christmas he'd never had, and then Sarah's fear had taken it away, and they were both back to being alone. The rest of Pine Ridge celebrated. Families opened presents and cooked elaborate meals and took photos to prove they were happy. Churches filled for services where people thanked God for blessings they'd earned through nothing but birth into the right circumstances. The diner stayed open because someone had to serve travelers passing through, and that someone was Sarah Morgan working Christmas Day because double-time pay meant maybe she could make January's rent if she sacrificed every holiday. Jake knew she was there. He drove past around noon and saw her car in the lot, saw her moving through the window serving customers who probably didn't tip extra just because it was Christmas. He wanted to go in, wanted to try again, wanted to fix what he'd broken. He kept driving instead because Marcus was right. Pushing harder would only make things worse. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in uncomfortable limbo. Jake learned through Mrs. Patterson, who'd taken it upon herself to become an informant, that Sarah had called the landlord, Roger Bellamy, asking about payment plans. Roger had laughed, told her the eviction stood unless she paid in full by January 5th, and suggested she should have thought about consequences before falling behind. Tommy reported that his attempt to pay the rent anonymously had failed. Roger refused payment from anyone except Sarah herself, said he wanted her out regardless of money, that the unit could fetch higher rent from a different tenant who'd actually pay on time. Apparently, Sarah's eviction was less about money and more about Roger being a vindictive landlord who enjoyed exercising power over desperate people. So we're back to square one. She needs help, won't accept it, and the landlord's actively working against her. What's the play? Jake didn't have an answer. The situation had devolved into exactly the kind of mess Marcus had warned about: good intentions colliding with complex reality, help being refused, and the window for intervention closing rapidly. New Year's Day brought complications that made everything worse. Sarah showed up at the Iron Horse bar at 11 a.m., looking like she hadn't slept in days. Jake saw her through the window and felt his chest tighten, because her showing up here, walking into a biker bar voluntarily, meant something had changed, and probably not for the better. He met her at the door before she could come inside, before she had to walk into territory that clearly terrified her. What happened? Sarah's hands were shaking. Her face showed controlled panic, the kind that came from being too scared to break down, but too overwhelmed to fully hold it together. Roger, my landlord, he came by the apartment last night. Said he knows about the presence, about you people trying to help. Said if I accept anything from a criminal organization, he'll report me to Child Protective Services, say I'm endangering Lily by associating with gangs. Jake's jaw clenched hard enough to hurt. That's not legal. He can't. He can do whatever he wants. He owns the building. He has lawyers. I have nothing. And he's right. If CPS investigates, if they think I'm involved with dangerous people, they could take Lily. Her voice broke on her daughter's name. Tears started falling, and she didn't bother wiping them away. I came to ask you to leave us alone, please. I know you were trying to help, but you're making everything worse. Roger's demanding the full rent by tomorrow, or he's calling CPS and starting eviction proceedings immediately. I don't have the money. I'm going to lose everything anyway, but at least if you're not involved, I might keep my daughter. The logic was desperate, but not wrong. Roger was weaponizing the club's attempted help, using Sarah's fear of losing Lily to force her into homelessness. It was cruel and effective, and exactly the kind of thing that made Jake want to introduce his fist to Roger's face repeatedly until the lesson about consequences sank in. But violence would only prove Roger right, would give him ammunition to claim the Hells Angels were dangerous, would make Sarah's situation worse instead of better. How much did he say you owe? 2,100, same as before. And you don't have it. I have 400. I've been saving every tip, every extra shift. It's not enough. It's never enough. Jake made a decision that was probably stupid but felt necessary. I'll loan you the money. Not the club, me personally. You pay me back when you can. No interest, no pressure. Take it to Roger, settle your debt, keep your apartment. He can't threaten you with CPS if there's nothing to investigate. Sarah stared at him like he'd spoken a language she didn't understand. Why would you do that, loan money to someone who can't pay you back? Because your daughter called asking for help, and I'm still trying to answer that call. This is me answering it differently. I can't take your money. You can and you will, because the alternative is Lily ending up in foster care while you live in your car, and I've been that kid in foster care. I know what it does to you. I'm not letting that happen to her if I can prevent it. Sarah's control finally broke. She sat down hard on the curb outside the bar and sobbed, her whole body shaking with the release of weeks of pressure. Jake sat beside her, not touching, not speaking, just present, while she fell apart in the way she probably hadn't let herself fall apart in years. When the crying finally stopped, Sarah wiped her face with her sleeves and looked at him with eyes that had gone from suspicious to simply exhausted. 1,700. That's what I still need. I'll pay you back. It might take years, but I'll pay every cent. I know you will. Jake pulled out his phone and texted Tommy needs 1,700 cash immediately. Emergency. Then he looked at Sarah and saw the exact moment when the walls started coming down, when pride gave way to desperation, when survival instinct overrode independence. Thank you. I don't understand why you're doing this, but thank you. You don't have to understand it. You just have to let it happen. Tommy arrived 20 minutes later with cash in an envelope. Sarah took it with hands that still trembled, counted it twice like she couldn't believe it was real, then stood and looked at Jake with an expression he couldn't quite read. I'm going to Roger's office right now. I'm paying this and getting written confirmation that the debt's settled. And then, she paused, then I need to figure out how to make sure I never end up here again. I might have an idea about that too, but one crisis at a time. Go settle with Roger. We'll talk after. Sarah nodded and walked to her car. The envelope clutched against her chest like she was afraid it might disappear if she didn't hold it tight enough. Jake watched her drive away and felt something shift, felt the first hint that maybe this situation wasn't completely destroyed, that maybe Sarah's walls coming down would let actual help happen instead of just being refused. Marcus appeared from inside the bar. You just gave her $1,700. Loaned, she's paying it back. You believe that? Yeah, I do. She's not like other people who say they'll pay back and then disappear. She's someone who keeps promises because promises are all she's got. Marcus studied Jake's face for a long moment. You're getting attached. That's dangerous. I'm invested. There's a difference. Not much of one from where I'm standing. Be careful, Stone. Saving people is a lot harder than you think, and it hurts a lot more when you can't. Jake didn't argue because Marcus was right. He was already too invested, already cared too much about whether Lily Morgan got to keep believing in Santa's helpers and whether Sarah Morgan got a break from the grinding poverty that had defined her adult life. He'd crossed from wanting to help into needing them to be okay, and that shift made everything more complicated. But complicated was better than the alternative. Complicated meant involvement, meant connection, meant the possibility that something good might come from choosing to show up when called. Sarah returned 3 hours later with a receipt showing her rent was paid through February and a look on her face that was equal parts relief and shell shock. She walked straight to Jake and held out the paper like proof was necessary. He took the money, gave me a receipt, said my account is current and the eviction notice is void. Good, that's good. He also said if I fall behind again, he won't give me another chance. February's rent is due in 4 weeks and I still don't know how I'm going to make it work. This was the opening Jake had been waiting for. What if you had a better job, one that paid enough to actually cover expenses? Sarah's expression went wary again. Walls starting to rebuild now that immediate crisis had passed. I don't have skills for better waitressing is what I know. You can read and write, you can do basic math, you can organize information and follow instructions. That's enough for bookkeeping. I don't know anything about bookkeeping. I'd teach you. Iron Horse Garage needs someone to handle invoices, track parts orders, manage payroll, $20 an hour, 30 hours a week. Flexible schedule around Lily's school. You interested? Sarah stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You're offering me a job. At your garage. Working for you. Working with me. There's a difference. This is insane. You loaned me $1,700 and now you're offering me employment. What exactly do you want from me? Jake met her eyes directly. I want you to be able to pay rent without working yourself to death. I want Lily to have a mother who's home more than 4 hours a day. I want you to believe that sometimes people help because helping is the right thing to do, not because they expect something in return. That's what I want. The speech left them both standing in the parking lot with the question hanging between them. Would Sarah accept help when it came packaged as opportunity instead of charity? Her answer came slowly, carefully, like she was testing ice to see if it would hold weight. If I say yes, if I take this job, I'm paying you back that $1,700 before anything else. Every extra dollar goes toward the debt. I won't owe you. Fair enough. And if you try anything, if this turns into something inappropriate or dangerous, I quit immediately and you never contact us again. Agreed. And I want everything in writing. Employment contract, payment, schedule, job duties. I won't take this on faith. Tommy can draw up paperwork today. Sarah exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping as tension released. Then yes, I'll take the job. I'll start as soon as possible because I need to give Murphy's Diner notice and I can't afford to miss paychecks between jobs. You start Monday. That gives you 3 days to transition. Bring Lily if you need to. The garage has space where she can do homework after school. You're serious about this? About all of it? I'm serious. Sarah laughed, suddenly sharp and slightly hysterical. This is the strangest week of my life. Christmas Eve, a biker gang shows up at my door. New Year's Day, that same biker loans me money. Now I'm working at a motorcycle garage because apparently my life wasn't weird enough already. Motorcycle club, not gang. And yeah, it's pretty strange from my end too. But strange doesn't mean wrong. I hope you're right, because if this goes bad, I'm taking you down with me. The threat was only half joking. Jake smiled despite everything. Fair enough, but it's not going to go bad, you'll see. Sarah left to pick up Lily from Mrs. Chen's apartment, where the 5-year-old spent afternoons when her mother worked. Jake watched her go and felt the weight of what he'd just committed to, not just helping someone in crisis, but creating ongoing connection that would require follow-through and effort in the kind of sustained care he'd spent most of his adult life avoiding. Marcus had been right. He was getting attached. And attachment meant vulnerability, meant the possibility of getting hurt when things fell apart. But it also meant the possibility of something working, of Sarah Morgan finding stable ground, of Lily Morgan growing up believing help existed when you needed it. That possibility felt worth the risk. Tommy appeared with a sheaf of papers an hour later. Employment contract. Standard terms: 20 per hour, 30 hours weekly, 2 weeks paid vacation, health insurance after 90 days. She can sign when she starts Monday. Health insurance. You want her to be able to take Lily to the doctor or not. Besides, it's good for the garage to have official employees instead of just cash under the table. Makes us look legitimate. We are legitimate. Yeah, but now we can prove it. That's different. Jake took the contract and reviewed it, making sure everything was clear and fair and exactly what he'd promised Sarah. The terms were generous but not suspiciously, so the kind of employment arrangement that would let her build a life instead of just surviving day to day, which was exactly what he wanted. Not because he expected anything in return, not because he was trying to be a hero, but because 28 years ago, foster care Jake Harrison would have given anything for one person to show up and say, "I see you struggling. Here's an opportunity. Take it and build something better." Nobody had shown up for that kid, but Jake could show up for Lily Morgan, could show up for Sarah Morgan, could be the person who answered when someone called for help instead of being another adult who pretended not to hear. The door to the bar opened, and a man Jake didn't recognize walked in. Mid-40s, worn work clothes, eyes that darted around nervously before landing on Jake. "You Jake Harrison?" "Who's asking?" "Roger Bellamy. I'm Sarah Morgan's landlord. We need to talk." Jake stood slowly, his body language shifting into something harder. Roger Bellamy looked nervous despite having initiated this confrontation, his eyes darting to the door like he was calculating escape routes. "You paid Sarah Morgan's rent." Roger's voice tried for accusatory but landed closer to whining. "She paid her own rent. I just provided the funds she was short. By loaning her money, you're trying to buy influence over my tenant." Jake crossed his arms and let silence stretch until Roger's discomfort became visible. Tommy had moved to block the door without being asked, and Marcus appeared from the back office with the kind of calm that preceded violence if circumstances required it. "I'm doing business that's none of yours. Sarah's account is current. That's all you need to know." Roger's face reddened. "I run a business too, and I don't need motorcycle thugs interfering with my operations. Sarah Morgan is a problem tenant who doesn't pay on time. I want her out." "Then you shouldn't have accepted her payment." "I accepted it because refusing would look bad. But mark my words, she'll fall behind again, and when she does, I'm evicting her immediately. No extensions, no payment plans, nothing. And if I find out you people are still involved, I'll make things very difficult for everyone." Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades learning how to intimidate without threatening. "Difficult how?" Roger shifted his weight, bravado cracking. "I have connections. Town council, police department, business owners. One call and I can make your garage's permits get reviewed. Your licenses questioned, your customers harassed. You want to keep operating in Pine Ridge, you stay away from my properties." Jake felt rage building, the specific kind that came from watching small men abuse what little power they had. Roger Bellamy owned apartment buildings that should have been condemned, charged rent that consumed most of his tenants' income, and threatened anyone who challenged his authority. He was every bad landlord Jake had encountered during his foster care years, every person who'd looked at struggling families and seen opportunities for exploitation. "You're threatening us." "I'm explaining reality. You bikers think you can do whatever you want because people are scared of you. But I'm not scared. I know how to use the system, and the system doesn't like criminals pretending to be legitimate businessmen." Tommy laughed without humor. "You should leave now before you say something that gets you hurt." Roger backed toward the door, his retreat undercutting whatever tough guy image he'd been trying to project. "Stay away from Sarah Morgan. Stay away from my properties. Final warning. He left quickly, his truck pulling out of the parking lot with enough speed to suggest he'd been more frightened than he'd admitted. Jake watched him go and felt the situation crystallizing into something that would require careful handling. Roger had drawn lines, made threats, positioned himself as an enemy. That meant whatever came next would be confrontation rather than cooperation. He's going to be a problem. Marcus's observation was obvious but needed saying. Yeah, question is what kind of problem? Tommy pulled up county records on his phone, scrolling through information about Roger's business dealings. What he found confirmed suspicions, code violations, ignored safety complaints, dismissed multiple accusations of harassment from tenants that had somehow never resulted in consequences. Roger had protection somewhere either through connections or money or both, and that protection let him operate without accountability. We need to be careful. If he's got pull with town council or police making moves against him could backfire. Jake knew Tommy was right but hated it anyway. Being careful meant Roger would keep exploiting the tenants, keep threatening Sarah, keep wielding power over people who had none. It meant watching injustice happen and doing nothing because fighting back might make things worse. But Marcus's expression suggested he was thinking tactically rather than emotionally. We document everything. Every interaction with Roger, every threat he makes, every building code violation we observe. We build a case so if things escalate, we've got ammunition. And we make sure Sarah knows to document everything too late, repairs harassment, anything that shows pattern of retaliation. It was smart strategy, the kind that came from experience navigating systems designed to favor people like Roger. Jake agreed, even though what he really wanted was to have a very direct conversation with the landlord about consequences for threatening vulnerable families. Sarah started work Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp. She arrived dressed in clothes that were clean, but worn her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, her expression showing the specific anxiety of someone starting a new job and terrified of screwing it up. Jake had spent Sunday organizing the office above the garage clearing space, setting up a computer with bookkeeping software, creating systems that would make sense to someone learning as they went. This is yours. He showed her the desk, the filing cabinets, the carefully labeled folders containing invoices and receipts and all the financial chaos he'd let accumulate because numbers weren't his strength. Sarah studied everything with the focused attention of someone who processed information quickly, her fingers already sorting through papers, her mind clearly making connections. You don't have a system. I have a system. It's just a bad system. This is going to take me weeks to organize properly, maybe months. That's fine. We're not in a hurry. Lily appeared in the doorway, clutching her backpack and looking uncertain. School didn't start for another hour, which meant she'd be here in the garage until Sarah could drop her off. Jake had anticipated this, had set up a corner with a small table and chair, had stocked it with coloring books and puzzles and activities that would keep a 5-year-old occupied. Is this for me? Lily's eyes had gone wide seeing the setup. Yeah, figured you might be here sometimes before or after school. Wanted you to have your own space. She dropped her backpack and ran to the table, immediately pulling out crayons and paper. Her earlier uncertainty replaced with the easy enthusiasm children brought to new situations when adults made them feel welcome. Sarah watched her daughter settle in, and something in her expression softened. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. Kids need spaces that are theirs. Makes them feel like they belong. The simple statement landed harder than Jake intended. Sarah's eyes went bright, and she turned away quickly, busying herself with paperwork to hide whatever emotion had surfaced. They worked in silence for the next 40 minutes, Sarah organizing chaos into order, Jake handling a customer in the garage below, Lily coloring pictures of houses with too many windows and dogs with too many legs. At 8:45, Sarah took Lily to school and returned by 9:15, diving back into the financial records with the kind of focus that suggested she was grateful for work that demanded enough attention to quiet her thoughts. By lunch, she'd created a system that actually made sense, had identified patterns in parts of ordering that would save money, had found billing errors that meant customers owed more than they'd paid. You're good at this. Sarah looked up from the computer screen, her expression surprised. It's just organization. Following rules, making sure numbers match. It's not complicated. It's complicated to me. I've been running this garage for 7 years and never figured out how to make the books balance properly. You did it in 4 hours. Pride flickered across her face before she suppressed it, like allowing herself to feel accomplished was dangerous. I'll have everything properly organized by the end of the week. Then we can set up automated systems so it stays organized instead of turning into chaos again. They fell into routine faster than Jake expected. Sarah arrived at 8, worked until 3 when she picked up Lily from school, and returned with her daughter who did homework at the small table while Sarah finished her hours. The arrangement worked because it had to, because Sarah needed the bum, and Jake needed the help, and Lily needed somewhere safe to exist while her mother worked. The garage became a second home for the child. She learned the names of tools memorized, which wrenches were which sizes, understood the difference between socket sets and Allen keys. Tommy taught her about engines, letting her hand him tools while he worked, explaining combustion and pistons, and how motorcycles were simpler than cars but also more temperamental. Bobby showed her the parts inventory system, let her help count stock, taught her to match part numbers with their corresponding equipment. And Jake, without quite meaning to, became the person Lily came to when she had questions or needed help, or just wanted someone to tell her she'd done good work on her homework. He'd never been around kids, much had avoided them, the way people avoided reminders of painful childhoods. But Lily was different. She didn't trigger memories of young Jake Harrison being unwanted. She made him think about who that kid could have become if someone had shown up and cared. 3 weeks passed. Sarah settled into the work, proved herself competent enough that Jake started trusting her with responsibilities beyond basic bookkeeping. She negotiated better rates with parts suppliers, reorganized the scheduling system to reduce downtime between jobs, identified inefficiencies that were costing money without improving service. The garage ran smoother with her there, which meant Jake's initial claim that he'd needed help hadn't been just an excuse to create employment. But Pine Ridge noticed. Small towns always notice when dynamics shifted, when people who were supposed to stay in their assigned places suddenly occupied different spaces. Sarah Morgan, working for the Hells Angels, became gossip that spread through church groups and PTA meetings and the diner where she'd waitressed for 3 years. Most of the talk was neutral curiosity, people trying to understand how a single mother ended up employed by a motorcycle club. Some of the talk was darker. Patricia Hendricks, the woman who'd left Sarah terrible tips and judgmental comments, organized what she called a concerned citizens meeting at the community center. 15 people attended, most of them older residents who'd lived in Pine Ridge long enough to remember when the Hells Angels first established their chapter and had decided then that bikers meant trouble regardless of evidence. Harold Simmons, the retired banker who served on town council, chaired the meeting with the self-importance of someone who believed his opinions carried weight. We need to address the Hells Angels situation. They're expanding their influence, infiltrating legitimate businesses, and now they're employing vulnerable women. It's a pattern of grooming and exploitation that we can't ignore. The meeting minutes, which leaked because small-town meetings always leaked, showed that Patricia had suggested the club was involved in criminal activity, that Sarah was likely being manipulated or threatened, that Lily was at risk simply by being exposed to motorcycle culture. They discussed filing complaints with Child Protective Services, with the Better Business Bureau, with the county sheriff's office. They'd proposed a town ordinance that would restrict where motorcycle clubs could operate effectively, shutting down the Iron Horse Garage by rezoning the property out of compliance. Jake learned about this through Maria Santos, the teacher at Pine Ridge Elementary, who'd been kind to Sarah from the beginning. She called him directly, her voice tight with anger. "They're trying to destroy you. Harold's already drafted an ordinance proposal. He's bringing it to the next council meeting for a vote." "When's the meeting?" 2 weeks from Thursday. You need to be there. You need to bring support. Because if this passes, your garage is done and Sarah's out of a while right when she's finally getting stable. Jake thanked her and immediately called an emergency chapter meeting. 23 brothers assembled that evening, their faces showing the particular anger that came from watching people weaponize bureaucracy against those who couldn't fight back through official channels. Marcus let everyone vent for 5 minutes, then cut through the noise with characteristic directness. "Here's what we're dealing with. Town council vote on an ordinance that would force us to relocate outside city limits. If it passes, we lose the garage, Sarah loses her job, and Pine Ridge gets to pat itself on the back for driving out the scary bikers. If it fails, we stay, but we've got enemies who will keep trying different approaches until something works. So we fight." Tommy's declaration was obvious but needed saying. "We fight smart. We show up at the council meeting with community support. We bring people who will testify that we're assets, not threats. We make it politically impossible for Harold and his friends to paint us as criminals without looking like prejudiced assholes. Bobby raised his hand. What about Sarah? She testifies too. If she's willing, but we don't pressure her, she's already taking heat for working here. Asking her to publicly defend us might be too much. Jake had been thinking about this since Maria's call. Sarah had spent 3 weeks building something. Stable had started relaxing in ways that suggested the constant survival stress was easing, had let Lily become attached to the garage and the people who worked there. Asking her to risk that stability by speaking at a town council meeting felt like putting unfair burden on someone who'd already carried too much. But the alternative was losing everything they'd built together. The job, the community, the beginning of something that felt like family, even though nobody had used that word yet. He'd have to ask, had to give her the choice rather than making decisions for her. That night, after Sarah had taken Lily home, Jake called her phone. She answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the wary tone of someone who'd learned that calls after business hours usually meant problems. Everything okay? Need to talk to you about something. Can you come by the garage tomorrow before you pick up Lily? Silence stretched long enough that Jake wondered if she'd hung up. Then, is this about the town council thing Maria called me to? Yeah, it's about that. I'll be there at 2:30. She showed up at 2:28, her punctuality suggesting anxiety rather than eagerness. They sat in the office with the door closed, and Jake laid out the situation without softening the implications. Sarah listened with the kind of stillness that came from processing information while trying not to react emotionally. They want to shut you down because of me, because I work here. They want to shut us down because they're scared of what they don't understand. You're just the excuse they're using. Feels the same from where I'm sitting. I take this job and suddenly you're dealing with town council investigations. Jake leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. I knew this might happen. Took the risk anyway because giving you employment was more important than worrying about what Patricia Hendricks thinks. But now we're here and the council votes in 2 weeks and I need to know if you're willing to speak at the meeting. Sarah's hands twisted together in her lap. Speak and say what? That I'm grateful for the job that won't change their minds. Speak and tell the truth. That you're a single mother who needed work and we gave you a fair chance that Lily's better off with you employed than she was when you were barely surviving. Make them see you as a person instead of a talking point. And if I speak and they still vote to shut you down, then I've made everything public. Everyone knows my business and I still lose my job. The fear in her voice was real and justified. Speaking meant exposure, meant vulnerability, meant risking the little bit of privacy and dignity she'd managed to protect. Jake wanted to promise it would work out, wanted to guarantee that courage would be rewarded, but he'd learned young that promises about the future were usually lies. I can't guarantee anything except that we'll fight as hard as we can. You speak or you don't, that's your call. Either way, we're not giving up without making them work for it. Sarah was quiet for a long time, her expression cycling through emotions too fast to track. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed, had gone from scared to determined. I'll do it. I'll speak. Because you gave me a chance when nobody else would, and that matters more than being comfortable. But Jake, if this goes bad, if we lose anyway, I need to know you'll help me find something else. I can't go back to Murphy's Diner. I can't go back to barely surviving. You have my word. We lose this fight, I'll make sure you land somewhere solid. She nodded and stood to leave, pausing at the door with her hand on the frame. Thank you. For asking instead of assuming. For treating me like I get a choice. That's not something I'm used to. She left before Jake could respond, but her words stayed with him. Sarah had spent so long being acted upon, having decisions made for her by circumstances and ex-husbands and landlords and systems that didn't care what she wanted, that simply being asked for her opinion felt noteworthy. That realization made Jake angry on her behalf, made him more determined to make sure this vote went their way. The next 13 days were spent organizing. Marcus reached out to other chapters, explained the situation, asked for support. Word spread through the Hells Angels network that Pine Ridge was facing an ordinance that could set precedent for other towns trying to force clubs out through legal maneuvering. By the day of the council meeting, Commitments had arrived from chapters in 4 surrounding towns. 63 bikers planning to attend, all of them dressed in their cleanest vests, all of them ready to demonstrate that motorcycle clubs were communities, not criminal organizations. The show of force was calculated. Too few bikers and they'd look weak, too many and they'd seem threatening. 63 was enough to fill the council chamber to make clear this wasn't just Pike Ridge's issue, but not so many that residents would feel intimidated. Father Thomas O'Brien agreed to speak on the club's behalf, his moral authority carrying weight that bikers couldn't match. Maria Santos recruited 5 other teachers who'd known Sarah from Lily's school, all of them prepared to testify about the positive changes they'd seen since Sarah got stable employment. Even Mrs. Patterson from Sarah's apartment building planned to attend her statement, prepared about how the Hells Angels had tried to help when nobody else cared. The morning of the vote arrived with February cold that made breathing painful. The council chamber filled an hour before the meeting started, residents packing in to witness what had become Pine Ridge's biggest controversy in years. The bikers arrived together, a parade of motorcycles that stretched 2 blocks, engines deliberately loud enough to announce their presence. They filed into the chamber and took up the entire left side, leather and patches, and crossed arms, creating a wall of silent solidarity. Sarah sat in the front row with Lily beside her. Jake had suggested leaving the child home, but Sarah insisted, said if they were going to judge her parenting, they should see exactly who they'd be affecting. Lily wore her pink coat, the one from Christmas, that had started this whole chain of events, and held her mother's hand with the seriousness of a child who understood something important was happening, even if the details were unclear. Harold Simmons called the meeting to order, his face showing satisfaction that this had come to a vote. Patricia Hendricks sat beside him, her expression radiating the righteous certainty of people who believed their prejudices were wisdom. The 5 council members looked uncomfortable with the packed chamber, with the bikers staring at them silently with the attention this small-town vote had somehow attracted. Harold began with his proposal. Ordinance 847B would restrict businesses with known criminal affiliations from operating within city limits, would require extensive background checks for business licenses, would give the council authority to revoke permits based on community safety concerns. The language was careful, technically designed to sound reasonable while specifically targeting the Hells Angels. This ordinance protects our families, our children, our community values. We cannot allow criminal organizations to normalize their presence by hiding behind legitimate business fronts. The Iron Horse Garage may appear to be a simple repair shop, but it's operated by a motorcycle gang with documented ties to illegal activity. Jake felt Tommy tense beside him, but Marcus's hand on the younger man's shoulder kept him seated. They'd agreed beforehand, let Harold talk, let him show his prejudice, let the opposition reveal exactly who they were before the defense began. Patricia spoke next, her voice dripping false concern. I'm particularly worried about Sarah Morgan and her daughter. This poor woman has been drawn into an organization she doesn't understand, put her child at risk by accepting employment from dangerous people. We have a responsibility to protect vulnerable citizens from exploitation. Sarah's hand tightened on Lily's. Her jaw clenched, but she stayed quiet because this was Harold and Patricia's time to speak, and responding now would only make things worse. The floor opened for public comment. Father Thomas stood first, his clerical collar giving him authority that cut through the chamber's tension. I've been pastor in Pine Ridge for 23 years. I've known many of these men. He gestured toward the bikers for most of that time. They've supported every church fundraiser, every community charity, every family in crisis that our parish couldn't help. When the Millers lost their home to fire, the Hells Angels provided temporary housing. When young Marcus Chen needed expensive medical treatment, they organized rides that raised $40,000. When Sarah Morgan needed employment, they gave her a fair wage and flexible schedule instead of judgment. He turned to look directly at Harold and Patricia. This ordinance isn't about safety. It's about fear. Fear of people who look different, who live differently, who challenge our comfortable assumptions about who deserves respect. I urge this council to reject fear and choose community. Maria Santos spoke next, her statement focused on Sarah specifically. I've taught Lily Morgan for 2 years. Before Christmas, she was a withdrawn child who came to school hungry more often than not, who wore clothes that didn't fit, who talked about being worried about her mom. After Christmas, after Sarah started working at the garage, everything changed. Lily eats lunch every day now. She wears a coat that keeps her warm. She smiles, she engages. She's become the bright kid she always had potential to be. That's not exploitation. That's what happens when someone gets the support they need. 5 more teachers echoed similar observations. Mrs. Patterson testified about watching the bikers try to help Sarah when her landlord was threatening eviction. A veteran named Robert Chen spoke about the Hells Angels supporting his PTSD treatment. The evidence accumulated testimony after testimony showing community investment rather than criminal activity. Then it was Sarah's turn. She stood slowly, Lily's hand still gripping hers, and walked to the podium. Her voice started quiet but strengthened as she spoke. My name is Sarah Morgan. 3 months ago, I was 2 months behind on rent, working double shifts at Murphy's Diner, watching my daughter go without because I couldn't afford to give her what she needed. I was failing as a mother, not because I wasn't trying, but because the system is designed to make sure poor people stay poor. She paused, her eyes finding Harold and Patricia. My daughter called the Iron Horse Bar asking for help because she was 5 years old and still believed someone might care. Jake Harrison heard that call and decided to answer it. He didn't have to. He could have erased the message and gone on with his life. But he showed up and he offered help, and when I was too proud and too scared to accept it, he offered opportunity instead. Her voice cracked slightly. I have a job now that pays enough to keep my daughter fed and housed. I have health insurance for the first time in 4 years. I have coworkers who treat me with respect, who teach my daughter skills she'll use her whole life, who've shown us what community actually means. And you want to take that away because you're scared of leather jackets and motorcycles. She looked at each council member in turn. Vote however you want, but know that if you shut down the Iron Horse Garage, you're not protecting anyone. You're just proving that the system only works for people who already have enough. Sarah sat down to silence, then applause that started with the bikers and spread through half the chamber. Harold's face had gone red. Patricia looked like she wanted to respond, but couldn't figure out how without proving Sarah's point. The council deliberated for 20 minutes in closed session. When they returned, the mayor, a woman named Susan Park, who'd been quiet through most of the meeting, spoke for the group. This council has heard passionate arguments on both sides. We've reviewed documentation of the Hells Angels community involvement, including substantial charitable contributions and support for local families. We've also considered concerns about business regulations and community standards. She paused, looking at her notes. After careful consideration, we vote 4-1 to reject Ordinance 847B. The Iron Horse Garage's permits and licenses remain valid. However, we strongly encourage ongoing dialogue between the Hells Angels and community leadership to address concerns and maintain positive relationships. The chamber erupted. Bikers cheering Patricia, shouting about the decision being wrong, Harold demanding a recount. But it was done. The vote had failed. The garage would stay open. Sarah would keep her job. And Pine Ridge would have to accept that motorcycle clubs could be part of the community instead of threats to it. Jake found Sarah outside after the meeting, Lily running ahead to show the pink coat to some of the other bikers. Sarah's face showed exhaustion mixed with relief, mixed with something that might have been pride. We won. Her statement was half disbelief, half wonder. Yeah, we won. I can't believe I did that. Spoke in front of all those people. Told them about being poor and desperate and failing. I thought I'd die of embarrassment. You were brave. That's what courage looks like. Sarah laughed shakily. Courage feels like nausea and shaking hands. But we won, so I guess it was worth it. And they stood in comfortable silence, while around them the community dispersed, some angry, most satisfied, and all of them aware that something significant had just happened. Jake wanted to say more, wanted to acknowledge that something between them had shifted over the past 3 months, that Sarah had gone from terrified stranger to trusted friend to something else that he didn't have words for yet. But before he could figure out how to articulate feelings he barely understood himself, Chief Marcus appeared with news that changed everything again. Just got a call from dispatch. Fire at Maple Street Apartments, multiple units involved. It's Sarah's building. The world narrowed to that single piece of information. Sarah's apartment. Fire. The building where 20 families lived, where Lily's things were, where Sarah had finally found stability. They ran to vehicles, Sarah climbing onto Jake's motorcycle without being asked, holding onto him while he drove too fast through streets that felt endless. The smell reached them 2 blocks away, smoke-burning plastic chemicals from whatever cheap materials the building was made of. When they rounded the corner, flames consumed the entire east wing, the section where Sarah's unit sat. Fire trucks already on scene, their hoses barely making impact against the blaze. Residents stood in clusters, some wrapped in blankets, most just standing in shock, watching their homes burn. Sarah climbed off the motorcycle before Jake had fully stopped running toward the building, and he had to grab her to keep her from trying to enter. "Let me go, our thing, everything we have." Sarah, look at it. "You can't go in there, the structure's collapsing." She fought him for a moment before the reality penetrated. The building was gone. Not just damaged, not just going to need repairs, gone. Flames had consumed everything, and even if firefighters contained it eventually, the apartments would be uninhabitable, condemned, demolished. Everything Sarah and Lily owned was being reduced to ash. She stopped fighting and went still in Jake's arms, her body rigid with shock. Around them, other residents were having similar realizations, were watching life savings and irreplaceable possessions disappear into smoke. Children cried. Adults stood frozen. The scene was disaster, was trauma, was the kind of thing that destroyed people's ability to believe things would be okay. The fire marshal approached after an hour, his face grim. Arson started in the maintenance closet with accelerant. Security footage shows a vehicle in the parking lot around the time it began. We've already made an arrest. Who? The marshal checked his notes. Roger Bellamy, the building's owner. Sarah made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Jake felt her legs give out and held her up, his mind processing what this meant. Roger had burned his own building, had destroyed 20 families' homes, had committed arson that could have killed people. All because, why, insurance money. Revenge for Sarah not being evicted. Pure spite. The answer didn't matter. The damage was done. Sarah and Lily were homeless again, this time through no fault of their own, this time with no warning that might have let them grab essentials. They had nothing except what they'd been wearing at the council meeting. "You're staying with me." Jake's statement wasn't a question. Sarah was too shocked to argue. "Both of you. My apartment above the garage. It's not big, but there's a bedroom Lily can use and a couch that's decent enough. You stay until we figure out something better." "I can't just move in with you." "You can and you will, because the alternative is a Red Cross shelter, and that's not happening. We'll figure out permanent arrangements later. Right now you need somewhere to sleep, and Lily needs to not spend tonight processing that everything she owned is gone." Sarah was crying now, silent tears that tracked through soot on her face. She nodded because arguing required energy she didn't have. Jake kept his arm around her while they waited for the fire to be fully contained, while the marshal took statements, while the Red Cross volunteers arrived with blankets and information about temporary housing. The other Hells Angels appeared, gradually called by words spreading through the chapter. Marcus, Tommy, Bobby, Danny, a dozen others, all of them taking in the scene and understanding immediately that this required a response. They gathered near Jake's motorcycle, their faces showing the particular anger that came from watching innocent people suffer. "How many families displaced?" Marcus's question was directed at the fire marshal, who looked surprised to be addressed by a biker, but answered anyway. 23. The entire East Wing. Building's condemned owners under arrest insurance is probably going to fight paying out since it was arson. They have somewhere to go. Red Cross is setting up at the community center, should handle immediate needs. Marcus nodded, his expression calculating. 23 families. We can do better than community center cots. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. Within 30 minutes, commitments arrived from Hells Angels chapters across 3 states. Emergency Housing Fund activated. Members with spare rooms opening their homes. The club's warehouse on the edge of town being converted into temporary dormitories. Food donations, clothing drives, cash contributions. The response was massive, immediate, the kind of thing that happened when brotherhood extended beyond patches and became actual community support. Sarah watched it unfold with disbelief. They're doing this for strangers. These people don't know anyone from my building. They know you, that's enough. By midnight, the fire was contained and plans were in motion. Sarah and Lily climbed into Jake's truck, too exhausted to process anything more. They drove to the apartment above the garage in silence, Lily asleep against her mother's shoulder. Sarah staring out the window at streets she'd driven 1,000 times that now felt foreign. Jake's apartment was exactly what he'd described: small, sparse, clean, in the obsessive way of people who'd learned in foster care that chaos was dangerous. He showed Sarah the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen stocked with basics. Lily woke enough to be carried to bed, her eyes barely opening before sleep reclaimed her. Sarah stood in the living room looking lost. I don't have anything. No clothes for tomorrow, no toiletries, no way to even brush Lily's hair for school. Everything's gone. Tomorrow we'll handle it. Tommy's wife is already gathering clothes in Lily's size. Elena Marcus's wife is buying toiletries and basics. We'll make sure you have what you need. This is too much. All of it. I can't keep taking from you. Jake stepped back closer, close enough to see the exhaustion in her eyes, the soot still smudged on her cheek, the way her hands trembled despite her attempt at control. Sarah, look at me. She did. You're not taking. We're giving because that's what family does. You're part of this now, whether you've accepted it yet or not. My chapter, my brothers, they voted you in the moment they decided to help. You're not alone. You're never going to be alone again unless you choose to be. Something in his words broke through her shock. She closed the distance between them and put her head on his chest, not quite a hug, but needing the contact, needing to know someone solid was there. Jake's arms came around her automatically, and they stood like that for a long time. Neither speaking, both too overwhelmed by the day to process what this proximity meant. When Sarah finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer. Thank you for everything. For the job, for speaking at the council meeting, for not letting me walk into that burning building, for offering your home. I don't know how to repay any of it. You don't repay family. You just show up for them when they need you, which you already did at that council meeting, so we're even. Sarah laughed weakly. Pretty sure we're not even, but I'll try to keep up. The first week of living together was awkward navigation of shared space by people who weren't used to sharing anything. Jake gave Sarah and Lily the bedroom, took the couch for himself despite Sarah's protests. Mornings were choreographed chaos, getting Lily ready for school, making sure Sarah had clothes for work, everyone trying not to step on each other in the small bathroom. Evenings were quiet or dinner eaten together because cooking separately seemed ridiculous. Lily doing homework at the kitchen table while Jake and Sarah cleaned up. It shouldn't have worked. Should have been uncomfortable and intrusive and awkward. But instead it felt natural in ways that surprised them both. Jake discovered he liked coming home to voices, to Lily's excited recounting of her school day, to Sarah's presence making the apartment feel lived in instead of just occupied. Sarah found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't since David left, knowing Lily was safe, knowing bills were handled, knowing someone else was sharing the weight of keeping their small family functioning. The second week brought moments that felt dangerously close to domestic. Jake teaching Lily to make scrambled eggs. Sarah organizing his kitchen because the current system made no sense. The three of them on the couch watching a kids' movie. Lily had picked Sarah falling asleep against Jake's shoulder while Lily provided running commentary on the plot. Small moments that accumulated into something neither adult was ready to name. The third week, late evening, after Lily was asleep, Sarah and Jake sat on the couch with careful space between them. Sarah had been quiet all day, her expression troubled in ways that suggested she was processing something difficult. I need to tell you something. Jake's chest tightened because that phrase never preceded good news. Okay. Sarah turned to face him, tucking one leg under herself. I'm scared of this, of us, of what's happening here. What's happening here? You know what's happening. Don't make me say it. Jake did know, had been feeling it too. The way proximity had turned into something more than convenience, the way their accidentally formed household had started feeling like chosen family, the way he'd catch himself watching Sarah move through his space and thinking about what it would be like if this was permanent. I know. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above whisper. I can't do this wrong again. Can't let Lily get attached to someone who's going to leave. Can't let myself believe this is real and then wake up one day to find you've decided we're too much trouble. I'm not David. I know you're not, but fear doesn't care about logic. Fear says everyone leaves eventually, that I'm too broken and too needy and too much work, that this will end badly and I'll be worse off than before because I let myself hope. Jake understood that fear had lived with his own version of it for decades. The certainty that caring about people meant getting hurt when they inevitably decided you weren't worth the effort. The walls built to protect against that hurt walls that kept you safe, but also kept you alone. I'm scared too. Never done this. Never lived with anyone, never been around kids, never wanted to, because wanting things you can't have hurts. But Sarah, these past 3 weeks having you and Lily here, it's the first time my apartment's felt like a home instead of just a place I sleep. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. We can be scared together. Take this slow, see where it goes. No promises about forever, because forever's a long time and we barely know each other. But maybe we try being a family temporarily and see if temporary turns into something more. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. What if it doesn't work? What if we try and fail and ruin everything we've built? Then we'll deal with that if it happens. But Sarah, what if it does work? What if we're both so scared of failing that we miss the chance at something good? She was quiet for a long moment, her hand still in his. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, tentative and brief but deliberate. When she pulled back, her expression had shifted from fearful to determined. Okay, we try, but slowly, for Lily's sake. For all our sakes. They sat together on the couch until late, talking about everything they hadn't said before. Sarah's marriage and divorce, the years of barely surviving, the fear that she was failing Lily by not providing enough. Jake's foster care history, the Christmases alone, the walls that had kept him isolated until Marcus in the club had shown him what brotherhood meant. Two people whose childhoods had taught them not to trust, learning slowly that maybe trust was possible with the right person. The next morning, Jake woke to find Lily standing beside the couch staring at him. Did you and Mommy kiss last night? His heart stopped. Sarah appeared from the bedroom, her face showing similar panic. Lily, baby, grown-ups talk sometimes, and are you going to be my dad now? The question was so direct, so hopeful, so completely five-year-old logic that both adults froze. Jake sat up, bringing himself to Lily's eye level. And would you want that if I was your dad? Lily nodded seriously. You teach me things, you make Mommy smile, you let us live here when our house burned down. That's what dads do, right? Sarah made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She knelt beside her daughter. Sweetheart, Jake and I are still figuring things out. We like each other, but becoming a family takes time. We don't want to promise anything we can't keep. But you're trying. We're trying. Lily seemed satisfied with this answer. She hugged Jake around the neck, quick and fierce, then ran to get ready for school. Sarah and Jake exchanged looks that contained entire conversations about how five-year-olds saw the world with clarity that adults complicated unnecessarily. 6 months later, summer heat replaced winter cold, and Pine Ridge looked completely different than it had in December. The Maple Street apartments had been demolished, the lot sold to a developer planning condos nobody in the neighborhood could afford. Roger Bellamy sat in county jail awaiting trial for arson and insurance fraud. Harold Simmons and Patricia Hendricks had formed a quieter opposition that mostly involved dirty looks and gossip, having learned that direct attacks only made the Hells Angels more sympathetic. And Sarah Morgan lived in Jake Harrison's apartment with no plans to leave. They'd found rhythm that worked. Sarah ran the garage's office with efficiency that increased profits enough to hire another mechanic. Lily thrived in ways that astonished her teachers, her grades excellent, her confidence visible. Jake discovered he liked being someone's partner, someone's de facto father figure, someone who mattered to people who mattered to him. The subject of making it official came up one night after Lily was asleep. They were on the couch again, Sarah tucked against Jake's side in a way that had become natural. I found a 2-bedroom apartment for rent. Reasonable price, good neighborhood, available next month. Jake's stomach dropped. You want to move out? I want to know if you want us to stay. Officially, not as temporary guests, but as people who live here, because this is our home. Jake pulled back enough to see her face. I want you to stay. Both of you. Permanently if you're willing. I know it's fast. I know conventional wisdom says we should wait longer. But Sarah, I'm 42 years old, and I spent 40 of those years alone. I don't want to waste more time pretending this isn't what I want. What do you want? I want you and Lily here every morning when I wake up. I want to teach her more about motorcycles and watch her grow up safe and loved. I want to build something with you that neither of us had before. I want a family." Sarah's smile was the kind that transformed her whole face. "Then we stay." "And Jake, I want that too. Want us to be real family, the choosing kind instead of the blood kind. Want Lily to grow up knowing she's wanted and safe. Want to build a life with you that's better than anything either of us imagined possible." They kissed, and this time it wasn't tentative exploration. It was certainty, was commitment, was two people deciding that being scared together was better than being safe alone. Christmas arrived again 1 year after Lily's phone call had changed everything. Jake woke to small hands shaking his shoulder to excited whispers about Santa coming to the sound of a child who believed in magic because adults had worked hard to make magic real. He opened his eyes to find Lily bouncing on the bed, Sarah standing in the doorway with coffee, and a smile that still surprised him with its warmth. "Merry Christmas, Stone." He sat up, pulling Lily into a hug. "Merry Christmas, kiddo. Come see what Santa brought, hurry." She dragged him out to the living room where a modest but carefully selected pile of presents waited. Nothing extravagant because they'd agreed on reasonable limits, but enough to make a 6-year-old's eyes go wide with joy. Sarah handed Jake his coffee, and they settled on the couch together, watching Lily tear through wrapping paper, listening to her exclamations about every gift, capturing it all on phones that would document this family's history. Chief Marcus and Elena stopped by mid-morning with Maya, who'd become Lily's unofficial big sister. The girls ran off to play while the adults sat in the small living room that had somehow accommodated everyone who mattered. Marcus looked at Jake and Sarah, at how they sat close together, at how natural they seemed as a unit, and smiled. "You did good, brother, both of you." Sarah laughed. "We're still figuring it out, making mistakes constantly. But yeah, I think we're doing okay. Better than okay. You built something here. Real family, the kind that chooses to stay." Later, after everyone had left and Lily was asleep surrounded by new toys, Sarah and Jake stood at the window looking at Pine Ridge, covered in fresh snow. Jake's arm was around her waist, her head rested on his shoulder, and neither needed to speak because everything worth saying had already been said through actions rather than words. "I love you." Sarah said it quietly, like she was still testing how the words felt. "Love you too. Both of you. My whole family." They stayed at the window until cold drove them back to warmth, back to the couch where they'd first admitted being scared, back to the space that had transformed from Jake's solitary apartment into a home containing everything he'd never known he wanted. And in the bedroom, Lily Morgan slept safely, dreaming of Santa's helpers who answered phone calls and showed up when needed, and proved that believing in magic wasn't childish. It was necessary. Because sometimes strangers became family, and sometimes phone calls changed lives, and sometimes the person you rescued ended up rescuing you right back.